Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for being here. My name is Susie Arnold, and I am happy to report that I'm actually celebrating my 10th anniversary at the Island Institute, where I work as the marine scientist. So I'm very excited to be talking to you tonight about science, action, and hope as it pertains to ocean climate change. So first, a little background on the Island Institute. We were founded in 1983. The Island Institute is a community development nonprofit organization based in Rockland, Maine. We've got more than 50 full-time staff, and we serve Maine's coastal communities, including Maine's 15 unbridged year-round island communities. Along with a strong and committed network of partners and supporters, we're hard at work addressing some of the toughest challenges facing Maine's communities, with a focus on empowering strong leaders, developing climate solutions, and creating resilient economies. So today, you can go to the next slide, please, Sue. I'll be speaking about ocean climate change, science, action, and hope. Okay, a minute here. Okay, so as the marine scientist at the Island Institute and an appointee to the Maine Climate Council and co-chair of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, I'm often asked to give presentations on the state of ocean climate change in Maine. And as you might imagine, this often involves providing updated research findings about rising sea levels, marine heat waves and warming water, invasive species, impacts to traditional fisheries, and increased acidification of coastal waters. I find this message, while accurate and important, to be deflating and lacking something that I will focus more on tonight, which is action and hope. So to start, I wanted to share a bit about something else I'm also asked frequently, which is what makes me hopeful. And that is people. First and foremost, my colleagues at the Island Institute make me hopeful. More specifically, though, for this talk, I challenged myself to identify 3 people that I've worked with in the last month on issues related to impacts of ocean climate change that I'll be discussing today that make me feel hopeful. The first person is Tad Miller. Tad is a fisherman. He fishes out of Matinicus for lobsters and scallops, and formerly ground fish and whatever else was abundant about 30 years ago when he started fishing. Tad always inspires me with his insightful ideas about how to navigate changes he's seeing on the water and other challenges facing the industry. The second person is Matt Moretti. For the last 12 years, Matt has operated Bangs Island Mussels in Casco Bay, where his company farms mussels, kelp, and scallops. He is an industry partner on ocean acidification remediation research that the Island Institute is engaged with in partnership with Dr. Nicole Price's lab at Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences. We were all recently at a shellfish and seaweed workshop in Portland, and Matt was on a panel of shellfish farmers, and he described why he has worked so hard at his business for so long under small margins. It was to produce sustainable local food that provides environmental services as it grows, and to provide people with a similar vision with good jobs. He now employs 15 year-round full-time people and provides benefits. This is very unusual for a shellfish aquaculture business in Maine. The third person is Tracy Sommers. Tracy's a resident of Great Diamond Island. She's not a scientist by training. She's not retired, and all I mean by that is that she doesn't have a lot of spare time. She's just plain dedicated to her place and tackling climate change head on. She recently spent months putting together a thoroughly researched and vetted lecture on sea level rise for her community and presented it to kick off an effort to create a climate future task force on her island. In most cases, I'm not sure what they said or did exactly that translated to hope for me. Thinking this through reminded me of a quote on a bench in the preserve where I walk that some people attribute to Maya Angelou, although its origins are disputed. I do hope it was Maya Angelou, though. Many of you probably know it. It's people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. In the cases I mentioned, I remember distinctly how these people made me feel. and that was hopeful, inspired, and motivated to do my work. So you can switch to the next slide. But as it turns out, hope is more than a feeling. It's a healing agent, and it's a science. So I'm going to give you the Psychology of Hope 101. And this will be basic because I am neither a psychologist nor a behavioral scientist. And this work was brought to my attention through a fantastic staff training I attended at the Island Institute by Dr. Ashley Cross. Dr. Cross referenced a man named Dr. Chan Hellman, who's the founding director of the Hope Research Center at the University of Oklahoma, Tulsa. He has found that hope has been shown to serve as a protective resilience factor when facing stressful life occurrences. Hope is about three primary components: goals, agency thinking, also called willpower, and pathways thinking, also called way power. To break it down, it starts with goal setting. So, do you have a meaningful goal? Goes on to willpower, or what's called agency thinking. Do you have the knowledge or determination that gives you confidence you can achieve your goals? And lastly, way power, also known as pathways thinking. Do you have a plan and the willingness to tweak your plan in order to reach your goal? Importantly, hope is more than optimism. It's about taking action. And without the way power or pathways thinking, it's simply wishful thinking. So to give it a little bit more of concrete specifics, I'll give you an example. So I built a goal, and that goal is to motivate people to take climate action because things they value are at risk: marine life, fisheries, communities, future generations. Secondly, I believe that I am capable of achieving it because of my training, research, and practice. And lastly, I have a plan, and it includes multiple methods of science translation to learn what resonates with people and to hone in on what is most effective. Now, the psychology literature that I reviewed discussed how trauma, fear, and rumination can rob someone of hope. Now, I haven't researched this part, but I suspect climate anxiety can do the same. Dr. Hellman describes in a 2021 TED Talk that one of the single best predictors of hope is our connectedness with each other, meaning an important component to nurture hope is through social outlets, like showing up for this talk or getting involved with a local group. So I'd like to transition to hope and climate science by bringing to your attention this paper. Next slide, please, Sue. Now, this paper came out of a conference that was held a few years ago back in Portland called the Gulf of Maine 2050. And it was a marine science conference looking out to what the Gulf of Maine might look like in 2050. It was put on by the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and the Gulf of Maine Council and other partners. And a lot of great science came out of this. And this is one of the papers, this is a social science paper that came out in the proceedings coming out of this conference. And it's called Empowering Hope-Based Climate Change, Communication Techniques for the Gulf of Maine. And I'm going to read to you right from the abstract and then provide you with two examples. So scientists, policymakers, and practitioners often want to communicate to the public about the seriousness of the situation to encourage mitigation and adaptation. Many standard communication strategies that rely on fear and scientific authority alone, rather than comprehensive explanations that include solutions, can leave audiences feeling overwhelmed and disengaged instead of hopeful and motivated to act. Next slide, please. Here's an example of one of those climate communications. Now, this is by no means a critique. I was part of the creation of the report that this is talking about, and I will make it very clear that the website, this is all about Maine's climate action plan. This website is a great place to go to for updated climate science and effective communications. This is just one example of one technique of translating complex science. So essentially what this statement is doing is that it's summarizing some of the scientific indicators that were outlined in the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee's report from Climate Science in 2021 in Maine. It was a report, updated science report to the Maine Climate Council. And essentially it highlights 10 notable indicators from this science update. And it does preface with grappling with these extreme events can feel overwhelming. So I'm going to read not all 10, but I'm going to read a few of them to you. And this is the type of language that is here. Driest period since 1895. Second warmest year on record for Maine. The Gulf of Maine had its warmest fall on record. Well, actually, we had our warmest year in the Gulf of Maine on record last year, but this report was published before that research was out. Third warmest winter temperature since 1895. Smoke from Western state wildfires traversing the continent, degrading air quality in Maine. Sea levels generally above average along the Maine coast through the end of the year. And if none of this pulls on your heartstrings yet, we added puffin chick survival. This past year was 65% below the previous 17 years because of climate-related stressors. So these are the facts. They may motivate you or they may cause you to feel despair or apathy. The next example I'm going to show with you. Sue, you can go to the next slide and then maybe let me share my screen, and I'm going to share a 4-minute documentary with folks.
If you haven't felt the effects of climate change, you will.
It's changing the entire planet, Earth. We live in a tiny place called Maine.
The natural resources that we have are what make Maine, Maine.
We live off it, we're fishermen, we're farmers, we're foresters.
Who doesn't want to have a job where you can see this every day?
A lot of people see climate change as like, oh, this is, a problem for the next generation.
It is not a problem of tomorrow, it is a problem of today.
It has the impact of changing life as we know it.
When I was a kid, this might have happened once every 10 years. Now you can pretty much count on it happening every year.
We're seeing water on sections of roads that we hadn't seen before.
Drought, erratic frost dates, more extreme storms.
The ski season's changing, ice fishing season's changing. All those things are changing right now.
The thing about climate change is that it is directly threatening the things that we love about Maine.
When I was a little kid and I would go out lobstering with my dad, we were just nailing lobsters hard.
I have traps I can show you that have stuff growing on them that I've never seen before.
The Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans.
Climate change isn't just something that happens on the coast. This is not just about sea level rise. This is about, in our case, not enough water.
Actually, 2 moose out here. Moose can have between 30 to 90,000 ticks on them. When we recover that animal, it's lost 30% of its body weight and it's dead. And that's because of the impact of winter tick.
In Maine, transportation emissions are 54% of overall state emissions.
We've always had really strong farming and forestry and fishing industries. In order for those industries to continue to thrive, we need to focus on climate change now.
We're writing a history right now for Maine that we will be ready. We're going to be a state leading.
It's really important for climate change not to be seen as something that we have to pay for. It's also an opportunity for us to participate in the economy in a new way.
There's 1.3 million people in the state of Maine. There's only 6% of us that benefit from heat pumps.
Maine is setting an example for other states to set bold climate goals.
Buildings have to save energy to address climate change. When we're up at full production, we're employing more than 100 people. Those are 100 good-paying jobs in a community that is a couple thousand people. That has a multiplier effect that is massive.
This is one of the first community solar farms built in Rumford. Having a solar farm or wind power are going to allow us to increase our tax base, and we're going to keep that money here at home where it belongs.
Framing the climate crisis as a social issue rather than a scientific issue, especially for younger folks, is critical.
This feels like a team project where we all need to contribute. I felt like this was one way that I could make a difference.
We hope we can do something about it.
The next 10 years are really important.
What Maine won't wait is trying to do is to say, here's what you can do about this. And by the way, they're gonna help save you money.
We're just trying to find common sense ways to help people take action. We are seeing businesses and towns follow the governor's lead. They're not waiting, and that's exciting.
If we want to continue to have the state that we all love and cherish so much, we need to act now. Maine cannot wait.
Alrighty, so picking back up in the abstract of this paper. So essentially, that I think is an example of a communication model that involves the head, understanding of climate change, the heart, hope through agency and efficacy, and the hands, or the intention to participate in community action, which further engages folks in climate change conversations. Next slide. So we know that climate change is being felt in myriad ways in the ocean, and we know that the driver is largely the same. It is excess CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. They are being absorbed by the ocean. That's causing things like ocean acidification, where a quarter to a third of those emissions are absorbed. And also the ocean is absorbing about 90% of the heat on the planet. So what I'm going to do next is to take the message of that last paper around climate communications and pairing climate stressors with climate action. So I'm going to take 3 climate stressors that are outlined in this figure here. One is around impacts on our fisheries. Another is around impacts of acidification. And lastly, I'm going to touch on impacts of sea level rise. And then I'm going to pair that climate science with action happening on the ground here in Maine. Next slide, please. So this picture here illustrates some of the regional circulation changes that are impacting the Gulf of Maine and in turn our fisheries. And I'd like to orient you to some important features that'll just help you understand my next statements here. So I can't point with my arrow, unfortunately, but what we have in the orange is the Gulf Stream, which is the warm, salty, northeastward flowing water current coming up the coast. And then the blue line at the top is the Labrador Current. That is the colder, fresher ocean current coming down from the Arctic. And a growing body of research is showing important links between the rapidly warming Arctic and changes in marine ecosystems at lower latitudes, specifically in the Gulf of Maine. So what we've known for some time is that Arctic warming and accelerating ice melt from Greenland are weakening what's called the AMOC, or the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. There's a reason why they use that acronym. That's a mouthful. So the weakening of the AMOC is linked with a northward shift of the Gulf Stream and a retreat of the Labrador Current, resulting in warmer water entering the Gulf of Maine through the Northeast Channel, which is the NEC here, entering the GOM, which is the Gulf of Maine. So new insights as of 2021 is research has showed that beginning in 2008, the Gulf Stream actually migrated closer to the tail of the Grand Banks. That's up here below the Labrador Current. It reduced input of Labrador Current water. And within 1 year of that warm, salty water at the tail of the Grand Banks, the subsurface warming progressed in the Gulf of Maine. And this helps us to interpret the rapid temperature change that we've seen in the Gulf of Maine. And this ability to simulate the Gulf Stream Labrador Current interaction enhances the predictability of future warming in the Gulf of Maine. So next slide, please. Now for context, ocean temperature records in Maine date back to 1880, and the historical mean of annual average sea surface temperature is 48.6. You can see that lower horizontal line. We know that the latest 12-month average is actually 3.8 degrees hotter than the historical average. And under all emission scenarios is projected to continue to increase. So you've got those squiggly lines going out towards 2100 there. That top line is the worst case emission scenario, RCP 8.5. And what we know is that by 2050, under that high emissions scenario, down east Maine temperatures will be similar to southern New England temperatures today. Next slide, please. So southern New England temperatures may sound nice for swimming, but they're actually drastically impacting marine species. So we're seeing major changes in disruption in distribution and abundance of species. For example, our important lobster fishery is shifting its distribution as water temperatures rise. So what you're seeing here on the left panel is lobster biomass per tow back in 1972. This is the Northeast Atlantic coast. You can see kind of Cape Cod protruding out here. And what you can see from the color is that the kind of the dark yellow, orange to red areas are indicating high biomass. So a lot of lobsters caught per scientific tow, basically. And the blue colors meaning a low number of lobsters were caught. If you look out to current day, or 2019 at least, you can see the distribution and abundance of lobsters has shifted drastically. Those reds are further north and offshore. And so you can see that the distribution and abundance of this important fishery has shifted as waters are warming, and it is projected to continue to shift as waters continue to warm. Next slide, please. So for this first example of climate action to address this climate stressor, I'm going to take you straight to our website, to our solutions library, where there are a host of stories about people, communities, and businesses taking action to combat climate change and other problems facing Maine's coast. So here, I'm going to talk a little bit about how the marine sector is one of the industries leading the efforts to reduce carbon emissions. Now, as mentioned in that film, we know it's unlikely that emissions from the marine sector are a large component of Maine's greenhouse gases. We know 54% is actually coming from transportation. So that's like you and I traveling in our cars all around our rural state. But the working waterfront community has taken this issue head on. And so one of the examples that is shared in the communications or in the solutions library is about the Cranberry Isles Fishermen's Co-op solar project. Next slide, please. So this is the, oops. Yep, there you go. This is the Cranberry Isles Fishermen's Co-op with its solar panels. These were installed in 2019, and I'll tell you a little bit about how that came to be. So in large part, the College of the Atlantic was very instrumental. The Island Institute helped out with some small funding through our Spark grants, which is basically some grant funding to get working waterfront businesses to take energy action. And then a federal grant called REAP. And so through partnerships, the Cranberry Isles Co-op decided that this was an investment that they could take on. And they had 100% buy-in from all of the members of their fishermen's co-op. And so basically they ended up getting a bank loan for the installation of the solar panels, the remaining costs, and that equated to what each fisherman was paying towards their electric bill prior to the solar installation. So that loan will be paid off by 2027, after which time there will be no monthly costs other than some maintenance going towards the upkeep of the solar panels, and they're expected to have a lifetime of about 30 years. So in the solutions library, there's an interview with the co-op manager. His name is Mark Nyman. And we asked him how much of a factor in the decision-making for the co-op had to do with climate change and reducing their carbon footprint. And his response was, climate change is getting worse and worse. And at the Cranberry Isles Fishermen's Co-op, we take that seriously, especially considering we make our livings out on the ocean and are influenced by ocean acidification and water temperature changes. It was a driving factor for us. So more work is underway to understand the greenhouse gas emissions in the seafood industry here in the Gulf of Maine. We continue to partner with working waterfront businesses and also other institutions like the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and Our Climate Common, sorry, that's a new name for me. They formerly were the Climate Table and now it's Our Climate Common. So we recently co-hosted a workshop for businesses to learn more about the carbon emissions in the seafood industry. Next slide, please. So another effort underway is to pilot electric outboard engines, and we've got lots of enthusiasm around this this particular project. This is an example of a Zoom meeting because that's what we have these days. But this is a shot of all of the constituents from various sectors of the marine industry, from lobster co-ops to harbor masters to aquaculturists to boat yards that are interested in becoming early adopters of electric outboard engines. So we're working closely with Maine Electric Boat Company. They're a company that's operated out of Rummery's boat yard down in Biddeford. I think we have one of those co-founders on the line here tonight. And another early adopter here in this picture here is Nick, one of the co-founders of Sea Meadow Foundation down at the Yarmouth Boatyard, testing out his new electric outboards. So lots of enthusiasm among the marine industry on decarbonization of working waterfronts. Next slide, please. Okay, so here I'm going to move on to the next climate stressor that I'll pair with action, and that is ocean acidification. So the left panel here is showing the major driver of ocean acidification, which is atmospheric carbon dioxide. And this is the red line in the left figure. The red line since with CO2 emissions since 1958. We've got a record of seawater CO2 measurements, that's the green line, and then seawater pH measurements, that's the blue line. So all three of these measurements are taken from Hawaii. The CO2, the atmospheric CO2 is taken from the top of Mauna Loa, the island of Hawaii, and the oceanic measurements are taken at this station Aloha, north of the archipelago. So as you can see, as atmospheric CO2 increases, seawater CO2 increases, and the pH decreases. And we know that this trend of declining pH or increasing acidification is projected to increase. But as you can see over here on the right panel, this varies under different emission scenarios. So the right panel is showing you global surface ocean pH over time with future IPCC scenarios. So the blue line is what we've measured to date. And then these other lines going out to 2100 are global pH under these different emission scenarios. So that you can see under the best case scenario, ocean pH will continue to decline, but will actually level off by late in the century, whereas we have drastically different results in ocean pH if we continue to emit carbon emissions. Next slide, please. So we understand that really the only solution to ocean acidification globally is the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions. But there are many things that we can do locally to decrease coastal acidification, which would be a whole nother topic to discuss of what we can do just to improve coastal acidification. But I'm going to touch on one action here, which is a research partnership to investigate the potential for marine vegetation to mitigate coastal ocean acidification and improve shellfish sustainability. So the partners on this work are listed here: Island Institute, Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences, Bangs Island Mussels, and Atlantic Sea Farms. And essentially what we have been investigating is if farmed sugar kelp can actually absorb CO2 through its photosynthesis and lower acidity levels, creating a halo of improved water quality around the kelp farm. So this work was underway for 3 years on the kelp farm off of Chebeague Island, operated by Ocean Approved at the time. And in partnership with Bangs Island mussels, we actually were able to demonstrate that mussels can grow thicker shells if they are grown inside this halo of improved water quality. So one of the end goals is to see if improved water quality may mean increased shellfish production and higher profits for shellfish farmers. So this work is continuing. Next slide, please. And this picture was taken just a couple of weeks ago out at the Bangs Island Mussels Clabbard Island site. And what you're seeing here in the foreground is the kelp. It's at the surface because it's ready to be harvested. And you can see it there by the red buoys. And then in the background there, those are two mussel rafts. And that buoy with the arrow pointing to the photograph of that metal cage, that is where one of our instrument packages that are measuring the parameters of ocean acidification is located. Now, if you could see further off to the right, there are a couple other mussel rafts to the south, and there's a lot more kelp lines surrounding that mussel raft on both sides. And we also have an instrument package between the mussel raft that has kelp surrounding it on all sides, basically to get an understanding of just how much kelp you need to grow around your mussels to see an improved shell quality. So this is the type of research that research partnership has evolved into, is looking into the design of the farm in terms of getting your best remediation benefit for the buck, essentially. All right, next slide, Sue. So lastly, on the topic of farm seaweed, I just wanted to bring to folks' attention that there is a real global push to understand the wide array of climate services of farmed seaweeds beyond just the acidification remediation potential that I just mentioned. And given our vast coastline and success with farming seaweed to date, there is a great potential for Maine in terms of climate action via seaweed farming. So these images, which I won't spend a lot of time on, but I just want to mention this, they come from a recent paper on the critical role of seaweed aquaculture in meeting the United Nations sustainability targets. And what's exciting is that we are making advancements in many of these areas in Maine already. So in particular, all four over here on the right, all four of these categories of ecosystem services provided by farm seaweeds link to the top UN Sustainable Development Goal of climate action. So just to know, there's lots of momentum in Maine now about investigating all of the climate services of farm seaweeds, from its carbon sequestration potential to its ability to remediate ocean acidification, and as a, really most importantly, probably as a substitute for products with larger carbon footprints. All right, next slide, Sue. All right, so last climate stressor I'll be discussing tonight is sea level rise, and I will pair that with some community action. So for background, we track sea level using tide gauges, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration maintains a network of tide gauges along the US coast. And in Maine, we have tide gauges on Seavey Island and Portland and Bar Harbor, Cutler and Eastport. So everyone can go to this Maine sea level rise dashboard online. The website is at the bottom there. And you can track sea level rise data at various tide gauge stations. So I've selected the station of Bar Harbor, and you can see on the left, you're able to view the minimum and maximum monthly sea levels dating back to 1947 in the case of the Bar Harbor station, and compare it to the current year in the historical average. So as you can see, September, over on the left, the black line, September and October 2021 both set records for monthly highs last year. And I used 2021 in this presentation because there were just more months of data. Otherwise, I'd only be looking at the first few months of 2022 that are logged up on the dashboard. So over on the right, this is more current, 2022. Here you can see the annual sea level rise from 1947, and some of the tide gauges go back to the early 1900s. So 1947 to 2022. And that the average increase is, so the blue line that we're looking at here is average increase is 0.73 feet per century at that tide gauge. But if you look at the red line, which is the last 25 years, you can see that that rate has increased to nearly 1 foot per century. Next slide, please. Now, unfortunately, we know that that rate is expected to continue to accelerate. This figure here is showing you the trend over time, and also projections out to the year 2100, or actually it says 2110 here, but it's to 2100. So based on scientific projections, the Maine Climate Council recommended that the state commit to manage for 1.5 feet of relative sea level rise by 2050 and 4 feet by 2100, but consider preparing to manage for 3 feet by 2050 and 8.8 feet by 2100 for high risk infrastructure. This is a lot to handle for communities. Next slide, please. So a lot has been done along the coast, and communities are really gearing up to take implementation action. There's been a lot of planning going on to date, and it's a lot to handle for small rural communities. And for that reason, the Island Institute has created and operated for over 5 years now what's called the Shore Up Fund. The Shore Up Fund. And this is a grant program. Communities can apply for up to $10,000, which funds anything from planning for sea level rise, education around sea level rise in their community, infrastructure planning, vulnerability assessments by engineering companies. It really is very flexible in terms of what we can fund with these grant dollars. And this is an output of the grants we've administered over the last 3 years. And you can see that it's over $200,000. And since I'm going to use Vinyl Haven as an example, I'll pull up their last Shore Up grant, which you can see here highlighted. And with support from Shore Up and with additional support from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and the Vinyl Haven Land Trust, we helped to pay for the installation of a sea level rise tide and weather tracking system. So the project included design, installation, and continuous data collection from a new tidal and weather station that is now located at the Vinyl Haven Ferry Terminal. And it provides this continuous real-time local tide and weather data. And it's anticipated that this would be used particularly by the Maine State Ferry Service as docking at astronomic high tides has become increasingly difficult at the Vinyl Haven Ferry Terminal, but also can be used by local lobstermen and other mariners just who need access to real-time weather activity. Next slide, please. So despite its size, Vinyl Haven is commonly used as a model for coastal community action to deal with sea level rise. And there is a very good reason for this. For those of you not familiar with Vinyl Haven, it's a island 15 miles off the shore of Rockland. It's got a year-round population of about 1,200 people with an estimated population of around 5,000 people during peak summer, heavily reliant on the lobster economy. They're always in the top 3 ports for landings value. I shouldn't say always, recently they have been though. Their downtown, they call their down street, or they refer to as down street because it's just one street, but it's a big downtown for a small island. And unfortunately, it's very vulnerable to flooding. So back in 2015, the topic of flooding was brought up at a select boards meeting, and the select board actually engaged the middle school science teacher to look into the problem. And the school came back and presented the results to the select board, and it ended up in the formation of a 7-member sea level rise committee on the island. And since 2015, that sea level rise committee has been very busy ensuring that sea level rise is taken into account in everything from their downtown revitalization plan to capital improvement plans, you name it. They're thinking about coastal flooding. Next slide, please. So Vinyl Haven is, and thanks to their sea level rise committee, has really checked off a lot of the boxes around what a community can do to plan ahead, to understand their vulnerabilities. They've completed something that's called the Maine Flood Resilience Checklist. This is like a highly recommended tool that was developed by the state. And we encourage every community to go through this checklist process. They received coastal community grant funding from the state to hire an engineering company, in this case, Ransom Engineering, to do a vulnerability assessment of the downtown area. Next slide, Sue. And lastly, I wanted to just mention this project here that only Vinyl Haven and Bath in the state of Maine that I'm aware of have received the award or to have this process take place. It's called the DART program, and it stands for Design and Resilience Team. And the DART team has come to Vinyl Haven and come to Bath, which is where I live, and carried out this exercise, which I find just to be a fantastic resource to think outside the box in terms of how communities can live with water in the future. And they start off by doing a visioning session with the community, and they ask relevant questions to the community. In the case of Vinyl Haven, they asked, why do people stay on Vinyl Haven? And, you know, they get a lot of answers that have to do with things like that we're resilient people, we value beauty, we value the community, extended family, the family support comes, or the family support keeps folks here. So they really get to understand the community, and then they take the vision that they heard from the community and design some sketches of how the community may deal with sea level rise. And the picture I chose from the like 50-page report is pictured here, and it's basically constructed wetlands on the Carver's Pond side of the downtown. And here they've got a multi-use path coming through. So there's lots of creativity from the landscape architects and the engineers and the group of others that are involved in this effort. So I wish this was something, I don't know if it's actually even still available, but it would be a great resource for other Maine communities. Next slide, Sue. So I just wanted to put a plug in for, as I've mentioned, Vinyl Haven is often used as a model for rural communities and what they can do to really tackle sea level rise. And because of Vinyl Haven's leadership skills in navigating the difficult conversation of how sea level rise is and will continue to impact their community, the Island Institute contracted with Beechwood Film to produce a short documentary about the process that they've gone through. And I find it to be a really moving film, and encourage you to take a look. You can find it on the Sea Level Rise page of our website, or it's also on YouTube. And finally, I think this is going to be my last slide. Next slide, Sue. I wanted to leave everybody with a call to action. So going back to the science of hope, I would encourage folks to number one, to set your goal. And here I've provided some main resources to help improve your agency and your pathways thinking toward climate action so that you'll have the skills to then meet your goal. And so a few local resources that folks can turn to for how they can take action are that website that I already mentioned, the mainewon'twait.org, which is where the action from the Maine Climate Plan is mentioned here. They have actions for people, they have actions for communities, and actions for businesses. So this is a great one. I also encourage you to peruse the Island Institute's Solutions Library for more climate action case studies from coastal Maine. This is a really good one that I intend to do. The next bullet here is participate in Maine Climate Table's May 20th Climate Change Communications Training. It's specifically tailored for Maine. And so it has messaging that has been tested to work and be effective in Maine. And it was just announced today, actually, that the training will be held on May 20th. So you can find more information at the Maine Climate Table website. Lastly, or two more, Riley Stevenson has put together an excellent presentation that's now on YouTube. It's a great youth voice about reflections on the future of the fishing industry. And lastly, the Maine Climate Action Now website also has some concrete steps that folks can take. And next slide, Sue. I'd just like to thank everybody for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. Looks like we have almost 15 minutes left for questions. And I think how the questions will work is that, as I understand it, people have been posting some questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to be looking at those questions. Now,
so, Susie, if it's okay with you, I might just do a quick voiceover from the great beyond. It's hard for me to type into that Google Doc for you initially. One of the first questions sent to me directly to me didn't show up in the Q&A, but please chat or Q&A, either one work, folks. We welcome your questions for Susie. One of the first questions was, you gave a couple of examples of those shore up grants. I think we have some folks interested in what other types of uses those shore up grants might have for their community, or someone in their community might be thinking about applying You mentioned, I think, the flood resilience checklist. And I know we've done some more technical planning types of grants. Can you just give a couple more examples of things that people might be thinking about for their own community and shore up grants?
Yeah, I'll just take the most recent ones. So Islesboro, we funded Islesboro around some historic preservation that needs to get done with their Grindle Point Lighthouse Station. And so it's helping to fund a vulnerability assessment and figure out steps forward for preserving that historic location. We've funded some community engagement work up in the Brooksville area. A local group has come together to call themselves Peninsula Tomorrow. It includes all of basically the towns in the Brooksville, like Deer Isle, Stonington, Blue Hill Peninsula. Let's see. We've funded here in my neck of the woods, we funded the Kennebec Estuary Land Trust, which is doing some really interesting work on tidal road crossings and improving culvert sizes so that there can be appropriate water flow, and basically in an effort to restore the function of salt marshes so that they can function as carbon sinks and not carbon sources. And at the same time, those larger culverts are needed with climate in order to protect the roads and road access down peninsulas. Yeah, we funded Damerscotto with some other culvert upgrades around their downtown area. And yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I think that gives you a sense. So I guess most recently we funded Monhegan for a vulnerability assessment around raising their wharf. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Terrific. Another question just came in. Do you think climate change is less political in Maine than other states? Got a couple follow-up for you, but I'll start with that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I guess I don't know how qualified I am to answer that, but I'll give it my best shot. I would say, yeah, maybe it is. I mean, we're a rural state. We have a lot of folks who are dependent upon natural resource industries. And I think that people who are dependent upon natural resource industries see the impacts of climate change every day. I mean, I'm thinking about the lobster fishery in particular because I work more closely with them, and many of them have long careers of working on the water every day, and they've seen firsthand changes. There's no arguing that water temperature has increased, and the things that are showing up in their traps are changing, and the invasive species are different, and so those can all be linked to warming water. So yeah, I think that helps to make it less political and more just about the facts.
Great answer, Susie. I know that we here at Island Institute try to keep our communications based on science, based on action, and now hope. We don't really take sides, or the question was, do we try to keep it apolitical? And I think the answer for us is yes. But the other question is how do we do this? And you know better than I do, the workshop about how to talk and write about climate change, or how not to, offered by another organization here in the state. Can you help remind me what that was?
Yeah, so that was the Maine climate table. And it is on May 20th. It was, let's see. Yeah, so you can go to maineclimatetable.org/communications-workshops. And it was just announced today. I know that I participated in one of the Maine climate tables trainings. I want to say it was like 6 or 7 years ago. And they had just done a ton of polling work to figure out what types of messages resonate with Mainers. And I don't know that they've redone the polling work, but I know that they have revamped the training to be more current. And so I'm excited to take the training again. And it's being offered at this point. Only one time has been listed, probably because it's likely to be virtual. So May 20th is the date, and Maine Climate Table is the organization.
And we'll send links to all of these relevant offerings, films, etc. in a follow-up email to all of you. Anyone who registered will get that email, and anyone who would like the slides, it's a pretty big file, but we will send slides to anyone who just flags me or sends us an email requesting those. Another question for you, Susie. On what scale will seaweed and other aquaculture need to be implemented or grown to actually make a change in ocean pH and carbon uptake?
Unfortunately, there's really, I think, no scale that farming sea vegetables could be at that would change acidification. I mean, it's the impact that we'll have is at a very local level. So think of the footprint of the farm itself and maybe a little bit downstream, depending upon the tidal flow. So it is not by any stretch of the imagination a fix for global acidification. It is not a fix for sequestering carbon. It's not a carbon capture fix. So it is really just a local remediation strategy. And at the scale that it is now, it's really just a local remediation strategy at the scale of a shellfish farm. So how much kelp do we need to grow around the shellfish so that they can feel the impact of improved water chemistry? So I hope that gets at the question.
I think we have time for one more. Sean from Rummery Boatyard is here. Hello, Sean. Thanks for saying hi to Susie. Don't know if she saw it, so I'll say hi on her
I haven't seen anything in the chat, so I apologize.
Yeah. Hi, Sean. This is a question asked in one of the registration forms, and glad we can get to it, especially with other folks from other boatyards possibly still here. Is my electric or switching to my electric outboard really going to make a difference? Is that something that should be in my plan?
So that's Sean from Rummery's.
No, someone else asked, and I just wanted to say hi to Sean in preface to that question.
It's going to take a village. So is one person switching their outboard to an electric going to solve the climate crisis? No. But if no one does anything, there's not a lot of hope that we have for our future in terms of living on this planet. So it needs to be a team approach. Everyone needs to chip in, and I mean, I think about it at an individual level. You know, if you like to go and, you know, putt around in your little outboard, like I know I love doing that, but it's like, for instance, let me give you a better example. If you like to mow your lawn, or if you have a lawnmower, one thing that I do is I have a push mower. Is my push mower going to solve the climate crisis? No. But if everyone had a push mower or got rid of their gas leaf blower and their gas electric and their gas outboard and their gas car, that's when we can really start to make a difference. We know in Maine that most of our emissions are coming from transportation. I don't know how well characterized marine transportation is in that equation. It's probably just a mere fraction. Nonetheless, everyone has to do their part.
Terrific answer. I've got no more questions for folks. I would just remind people that we'll stay on a little bit longer. Would love to see your suggestions for other offerings we might make, or other topics you'd like us to cover in these Let's Talk lecture series. And just special thank you to Dr. Susie Arnold. You always knock it right out of the park, Susie. Thank you so much for all of the hard work that goes into these things. And now you might want to start looking at the chat box, Susie.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sue. Thank you everyone for listening, and hopefully I can see you in person soon.